He usually does the machine part. I do all the cheese making and the animal handling. Not all homestead milkers will do this, but I just feel like a little extra insurance is always good. It is the great debate, Ford versus Chevy, Coke versus Pepsi, and of course, cow versus goat. As you may know, there are very passionate advocates on both sides of the homestead dairy aisle when it comes to either adding a dairy goat or a milk cow to your homestead. But in today's video, I'm going to help you sort through all the noise and figure out which one is the best for your homestead, and I'll also share my favorite animal too. So as some of you know, goats were one of the very first livestock animals that we added to our homestead way back in 2010, actually before we even started having babies, human babies. And we messed around with the goats for a while. I'd never milked an animal before. I didn't understand raw milk. And once I kind of got my bearings, we added our milk cow about 1.5 years later, and then kind of took a break from the goats. However, my daughter Mesa has been getting back into goats. She has this little Nigerian dwarf herd, and so now the Prairie Homestead has goats once again. Right now we're milking our cow Acorn twice a day because her calf died. You probably saw that in a video a couple weeks ago. And Mesa's also milking her goats most of the days, so it's a really great time for us to be able to do a side-by-side comparison. So the first thing you may want to consider when you're trying to pick a dairy animal for your homestead is the price. Now, a good dairy goat will run you anywhere from around $200 to $500, and of course that depends on the breed and if they're registered and what sort of experience they have. Now, contrast that with a good dairy cow, and you're looking anywhere from $1,500 to up to $3,000 or more for a solid, proven family milk cow. What are you doing? So if your budget is a little bit smaller, a goat's going to be a logical choice, whereas if you're willing to put in a little bit more of an investment up front, a cow might be the perfect option for your homestead, especially if you have more mouths to feed. A word of warning here, it can be really tempting to find the bargain basement dairy goat or milk cow when you're first starting out. You know, the one with half an udder, or who's had milk fever in the past, or who's three-legged or something like that. Really try to avoid that, especially if you're new to dairy, because those animals generally are going to cause you far more headache than the money you'll save. So stick with a solid animal from a reputable breeder, and you're going to be far happier in the long run. The next thing to consider is feed. So there's this myth floating around that goats will eat everything. It's actually not true. They're pretty picky, I've found. And you want to make sure you are feeding your dairy animals, whether it's a goat or a cow, good quality feed, because they're taking all that stuff you're feeding them and turning it into the milk you're drinking. So we like to feed our animals good quality grass, or sometimes a grass alfalfa mix, depending on where they're at in their lactation cycle. That being said, goats eat way less than a milk cow. So if you're on a budget and you're trying to keep your feed costs down, goats definitely win on this point. All right, next thing to consider is management. So either a goat or a cow, they're gonna need some sort of fence and probably some sort of barn or covering if you live in a place that has any sort of colder seasons. The general consensus is that goats need a fence that's basically watertight in order to keep them in. A cow will respect a barbed wire fence or something similar. Goats will go under and over and through unless you have some sort of electrified or woven wire fence. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Now on the flip side, when it comes to moving goats around or bringing in breeding stock so you can get your female goats bred, goats are much, much easier than cattle. You could technically haul a goat around in a minivan if you wanted to. So I would say when it comes to overall management, goats are a lot easier, and they definitely win on this account because you don't need a horse trailer or a big truck, and they're just a lot easier to manage. So one of the factors that was a huge selling point for us when we transitioned from goats over to cows was cream. A lot of people don't realize that goat's milk is naturally homogenized, which means that it's nice and creamy, but the cream doesn't rise to the top, which means it's a lot harder to make goat butter or goat cream cheese or goat whipped cream unless you have a cream separator, which we don't have. So one of the main reasons we got into milk cows is because I wanted those 3 to 4 inch cream lines floating on the top of my milk. Right now, because we're milking twice a day, we are getting 5 to 6 gallons every single day. And honestly, that can be a blessing and a curse because some days I just don't want to deal with that much milk. But when I want to make cheeses, or when my kids want to have as much raw milk as they can drink, it's kind of nice. So with all that milk, we're able to feed this bottle calf. It's not Acorn's baby, but it's one that lost his mom. So we're able to give him all the milk he can drink, plus have more than enough milk for a ton of cheese making and drinking in the house and butter and, well, pretty much anything you can imagine. Now, one thing that people often are worried about with goat milk is they're afraid it's gonna taste goaty. A lot of people have had bad experiences over the years with goat milk that is just a little too strong, and honestly, we haven't had that issue. As long as our milk is clean and cold and we handle it well, it really doesn't taste a whole lot different than cow's milk. It depends a little bit on the breed, but for the most part, we feel like the taste is pretty similar. But in my experience, I found that cow's milk gives me a few more options. Like I mentioned earlier, the cream is a really big deal for us, and so cow's milk enables us to do the butter and the cream cheese and the ice cream. I've also discovered that it's a little bit trickier to make yogurt with goat's milk. It has something to do with the structure of the milk itself. It just doesn't set up quite the same. You have to do a little extra finagling to make that work. And one other factor here is the quantity of milk. Now with our Nigerian dwarfs, they're a smaller breed, but we only get a couple cups of milk per milking. So if I'm gonna make a big batch of cheese that requires 3 or 4 gallons of milk, it's gonna take me a while to save up that much quantity in order to make that cheese. The final verdict? Well, for us, it's cows. They just happen to be my personal favorite, and they make the most sense for what we do here on our homestead. But really, the winner for you is going to depend on your preferences, where you live, what your budget is like, and there's really no right or wrong answer. I know a lot of really happy goat-owning homesteaders and a lot of really happy cow-owning homesteaders. So totally up to you, but I think either one that you go with is going to make a great addition to your homestead. Now, even though cows are my favorite, sometimes owning a milk cow isn't all sunshine and roses. And this video right here will show you probably my least favorite part of owning a milk cow.